Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Right, and we're so glad you're joining us for this.
Yeah, we really are. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you're standing in the middle of this incredibly loud, screaming crowd.
Sounds awful already.
Right. People are just throwing insults at you, and your phone is in your pocket, and it's just buzzing with 50 urgent, anxiety-inducing notifications.
It's just a normal Tuesday, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Just modern life. The global economy is doing whatever terrifying thing the global economy is doing this week. But here's the thing. Your heart rate hasn't changed at all.
Wow.
You are completely, perfectly dry in the absolute middle of a flood.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah, well, today we're taking a really deep dive into a 2,000-year-old blueprint that actually claims this exact psychological state isn't just, some fantasy. It claims it is completely 100% attainable.
But the instructions for getting there, they're going to challenge basically every single thing our modern culture tells us about how to be happy.
Oh, absolutely. So, okay, let's unpack this because we are looking at a roadmap for spiritual and mental mastery that, it literally predates the Roman Empire.
It does. It's ancient. We're acting as guides today through two of the most demanding but also just universally applicable chapters of this foundational text of Eastern philosophy, which is the Dhammapada.
And specifically, we're looking at chapters 25 and 26, right?
Exactly. The chapter's titled the Bhikshu, which means the mendicant or the monk, and the Brahmana, which translates to the noble one.
And what blows my mind is how the psychological traps this author identifies, they map so perfectly onto the 21st century. It's almost unsettling how well they understood the human mind's vulnerability to overstimulation.
Right, because the hardware hasn't changed.
Exactly. Human hardware is the same. So our mission in this deep dive is to figure out how to take this ancient internal architecture and actually apply it to a really modern, hyper-connected life.
Well, what's fascinating here is the overarching theme. It's essentially a complete redefinition of human worth.
Which we desperately need.
We really do.
Yeah.
The text completely shifts the foundation of status away from, what we can show the outside world. And it places it squarely on character and on this idea of absolute internal mastery.
Absolute internal mastery.
Yeah, it posits that true freedom has absolutely nothing to do with manipulating your external circumstances. It's all about the radical restraint of the senses and intentionally releasing your attachments.
Which is just so incredibly countercultural. Think about it. We live in a world that is completely obsessed with the external.
Obsessed.
We organize our entire lives around measurable status, job titles, follower counts, zip codes, the kind of car you drive. But to understand why this text pushes back so incredibly hard against all of that, we have to kind of look at the world the author was actually addressing.
Right. The historical context is key here. Because in the ancient Indian context where this text originated, holiness and authority, they were largely tied to these really rigid social structures.
Like the caste system.
Exactly. You had the Brahmana class, the priestly caste, where spiritual authority was literally seen as a birthright.
Like you were just born holy.
Right. It was in your blood. And for those who were trying to actively demonstrate their devotion, it became this really extreme physical performance.
Oh, the performance aspect is fascinating. What did that look like back then?
Well, people would wear garments made of goat skins, for one.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and they'd go live in complete isolation in the forest.
Yeah.
And they'd wear their hair in these very specific, heavily plaited or matted styles to signal to everyone, look at my asceticism.
It's like the ancient equivalent of the blue check mark.
That's exactly what it is.
A verified badge that just screams, look at me, I am spiritually advanced.
But the text absolutely eviscerates this behavior. It doesn't hold back.
Let me grab the quote. Yeah, verse 394. There is this brutal phrasing where the author essentially asks, what is the use of plaited hair, O fool? What of the raiment of goat skins? Within thee there is ravening, but the outside thou makest clean.
Ravening is such an incredibly precise translation of the psychological state they're describing there.
Because it's not just like being a little hungry.
No. Not at all. It implies this ferocious, predatory, insatiable hunger.
Right. It's a void that consumes everything and is just never satisfied.
And the text is really calling out the profound hypocrisy here. Managing an external image is vastly easier than doing the actual internal work.
Oh, for sure. Putting on a goat skin takes, 5 minutes?
Exactly. But conquering your own greed, that takes a lifetime.
And the thing is, the props have evolved, obviously. We aren't walking around in goatskins. Well, most of us aren't.
Most of us, yeah.
But the underlying human behavior is absolutely identical today. The drive to curate the external while just completely ignoring that internal ravening, I'd argue that's the defining psychological crisis of our era.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
Just think about modern performative wellness, right? Or hustle culture.
Oh, hustle culture is the perfect example.
Someone might have this, perfectly curated morning routine video online. They've got the incredibly aesthetic matcha latte.
The expensive yoga gear.
Yes. The minimalist apartment with the perfect lighting and the caption that just says, "Good vibes only." They have made the outside exceptionally clean.
But if you were to look at their actual mental state,
It's that word, ravening. They are internally vibrating with anxiety.
they're constantly checking their metrics.
Constantly, they're comparing themselves to competitors, and they are perpetually terrified of falling behind.
The ravening today is really just the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the facade.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
And the text dismantles this by stating explicitly that true nobility, being a true Brahmana, has nothing to do with family, birth, or that outward performance.
Right. Verses 393 and 396 go into that.
Exactly. It relies entirely on internal truth, righteousness, and most importantly, being free from attachments.
But wait, this brings up a massive practical problem for me, and probably for anyone listening.
Okay, what is it?
It's very easy to put on an audio track and say, just focus on your internal righteousness and let go of your attachments.
Right.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
It sounds like a great bumper sticker. But if outward appearance really doesn't matter and true nobility is entirely internal, how exactly does this ancient text tell us to actually build that internal architecture?
Because it's not easy.
No, because my internal architecture right now feels like it's built completely out of stress and like iced coffee.
Well, the mechanism of change presented here is actually where modern readers usually start to recoil a bit.
Uh-oh. Why?
Because the primary tool for building this internal architecture is intense, methodical restraint.
Restraint. Okay. Restraint of what exactly?
The senses. Chapter 25 has an intense focus on this. Verse 360 says, restraint in the eye is good. Good is restraint in the ear. And it goes through them systematically.
The nose, the tongue, the body.
Speech and thought. In this philosophical framework, you have to remember the mind is also treated as a sense organ.
Oh, that's interesting. So the mind is a sense.
Yes. And the critical shift in perspective here is that the text views the senses not just as these passive windows that we use to enjoy the world.
What are they then?
They're active vulnerabilities. They are gates.
Gates. And if the gates are left wide open, the city gets invaded.
Exactly. The text actually uses the imagery of being saved from the flood. Verse 370 calls the practitioner who has mastered this ogatina, which means saved from the flood.
Man, that resonates deeply. Because flooded is the exact word I would use for how I feel when I look at a screen for too long.
The flood of information, opinions, outrage.
Yes. But let's pause for a second on how, honestly, offensive the concept of restraint is to the modern ear.
Well, it's a tough sell.
In the West, particularly right now in the 21st century, restraint sounds like this relic of a prudish, totally oppressive past.
It does. It sounds restrictive.
Completely. I'm going to push back on this ancient premise right now on behalf of probably everyone listening. Doesn't modern psychology tell us that repressing our desires just creates a shadow self?
The very common modern critique, yes.
Right. If I put a heavy gatekeeper on all my senses, aren't I just bottling up these natural human impulses until they eventually just explode? I mean, our culture's absolute highest virtue is self-expression.
Treat yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Treat yourself. Follow your instincts. Live your truth. Restraint sounds like toxic repression.
And that is the exact tension we need to explore. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a vast psychological difference between toxic repression and conscious restraint.
Okay, lay that out for me. What's the difference?
Repression is born of shame and fear. It's pretending you don't have desires, pushing them down into the subconscious where they secretly control you.
You're ignoring the horse entirely.
Right. But restraint, in the context of this ancient wisdom, is born of profound self-awareness. It is not about pretending the desire doesn't exist.
So what are you doing with it?
You're recognizing the desire, acknowledging it, and then consciously choosing not to let it steer the ship. It frames restraint not as deprivation, but as ultimate protection.
Okay, protection. Protection from what, though?
Protection for the modern flood we just talked about. Today, that flood is literal.
Yeah.
And it's highly engineered.
Highly engineered is right.
It is an endless stream of data, notifications, outrage-inducing news cycles. We're talking about algorithms specifically designed by brilliant neurologists and software engineers to completely hijack your attention.
Right. They want your eyes on the screen.
Exactly. So when you do not restrain your eyes and ears, say, when you mindlessly doom scroll at 2 in the morning, you are not exercising your freedom.
You're surrendering.
Yes.
You're literally handing the keys to your emotional state over to a server farm in Silicon Valley.
Precisely. We confuse a lack of impulse control with actual freedom. The text argues that a lack of restraint is actually slavery to your impulses and slavery to anyone clever enough to manipulate those impulses.
Wow. That's a paradigm shift right there. And the ancient authors, they did not sugarcoat the consequences of living without that impulse control.
No, they used very strong pedagogical imagery to wake the reader up.
Yeah, let me read verse 371. There's this terrifying visceral warning where it tells the practitioner not to be heedless and not to direct their thoughts entirely toward pleasure. Because if they do, they'll end up having to swallow the iron ball in hell and they'll be crying out, "This is pain."
Right, and we have to understand that pedagogically. This isn't a threat at a literal underworld where horned demons force-feed you hot.
Well, it's a metaphor.
It is a brilliant psychological description of the subjective experience of a completely unrestrained mind.
It's the mechanics of addiction.
Exactly.
When you direct your thoughts entirely toward what gives you an immediate dopamine hit, whether that's, sugar, validation on social media, shopping online, or harder substances, you eventually end up swallowing an iron ball of consequence.
And it burns you from the inside out.
Yes. The initial pleasure inevitably mutates into this burning compulsion where you are crying out, "This is pain," but you just can't stop doing it.
The iron ball is the destroyed attention span. It's the broken relationships, the chronic anxiety that comes from needing constant stimulation.
The text mentions heedlessness, too.
Right, the heedlessness the text warns against is that sleepwalking state where you just blindly react to whatever bright color or loud noise is put in front of you.
Okay, so how do we practically build the muscle to avoid the iron ball? We need a practical way to practice restraint that doesn't just feel like mere punishment.
Let's talk about the sense fast.
Yes!
Yeah.
I love this concept. Because we all understand fasting from food to, reset our metabolism or our gut. What happens when we apply that exact same logic to our senses?
Walk me through the mechanics of a sense fast in a modern context. How would you do it?
Okay, so you pick let's take the eyes. And you pick one specific hour of your day to consciously, actively restrain your eyes from consuming any digital junk food.
No screens at all.
No screens, no scrolling, no reading the news, no having a TV show on in the background while you cook dinner. You are putting a conscious gatekeeper at your eyes for just 60 minutes.
That sounds harder than it should be.
Oh, the first 10 minutes are excruciating, but you can do it with ears too. You drive your entire morning commute in total silence.
No podcasts.
Even ours.
Even ours. You don't pump in music. You don't listen to talk radio. You just practice holding the gate closed. And it's not because the music is evil.
Right, it's about the discipline.
It's to prove to your own nervous system that you actually can close the gate.
What that tells me is you are reestablishing autonomy. You are remembering that you have a choice in the matter.
And the text uses an analogy that fits this perfectly. Verse 380 advises the practitioner to curb thyself as the merchant curbs a good horse. I love that image.
Because a good horse is this powerful, beautiful, incredibly useful animal. The goal of a merchant isn't to kill the horse.
Or break its legs.
Right, or lock it in a dark barn forever. That would be repression. The goal is to take the reins so the horse goes where the merchant actually needs to go.
Because otherwise the horse just goes wherever the freshest grass is.
Exactly. The human mind is that powerful wild horse. Restraint is simply taking the reins. Because if you don't have the reins, you are literally just being dragged through the dirt behind a galloping animal.
And taking those reins is the absolute prerequisite for the next phase of mastery.
Because stopping the flood is just step one.
Exactly. Restraint is about stopping new chaos from entering the gates. But what do you do with all the chaos, the grudges, and the desires that are already locked inside the city walls?
Right. You've stopped the flood from outside, but your basement is still completely filled with muddy water.
Yes. The horse is under control, but it's still carrying a dangerously heavy load.
Which brings us to what might be my absolute favorite verse, and honestly the most profound command in the entire text.
Let's hear it.
Verse 369, it says, "O Bhikshu, empty this boat. If emptied, it will go quickly. Having cut off passion and hatred, thou wilt go to nirvana."
Empty this boat. The urgency there and just the clarity of that command, it's striking.
It really is.
The boat is the metaphor for your life, your mind, your ongoing journey, and it is weighed down by cargo that you mistakenly believe is absolutely necessary to carry.
And the text doesn't just say cargo generally, it identifies the heaviest pieces specifically.
Yeah.
Passion and hatred.
And we definitely need to clarify those terms for a modern audience.
Right, because passion here doesn't mean having a healthy enthusiasm for, like, woodworking or loving your spouse.
Oh, it means clinging. Grasping. It's that obsessive white-knuckle desire that tells you, I must have this specific thing to be whole.
And hatred is just the mirror image of that, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the obsessive aversion. The grudges you nurse, the resentments you just refuse to let go of, the anger at how you were treated by someone 5 years ago.
Those two forces, the obsessive grasping and the obsessive rejecting those, are the lead weights that are sinking your boat.
It's a heavy load.
You know, I think the most accurate modern metaphor for the boat is a smartphone.
A smartphone. Okay, explain that.
Well, we've all had that experience where your phone is suddenly incredibly hot to the touch, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's lagging, it's freezing up, and the battery is draining by like 1% every minute, and you can't figure out why because you only have one app open on the screen.
Right, you're just looking at your email. And the reason it's burning up is always what's happening invisibly.
Exactly. You look at the app switcher, and you have 95 apps running in the background.
Just draining power.
Yes. You aren't actively looking at them, but they are open. They are pinging GPS satellites to track your location. They are downloading updates. They're constantly refreshing. They are draining your processing power.
That's a brilliant analogy.
Passion and hatred are the heaviest, most poorly optimized apps in the human mind.
And that framing completely changes how we view mental exhaustion today. When people say they are burned out, they almost always blame their to-do list.
But it's usually not the to-do list.
No, it's not.
It's the background apps, that simmering grudge against your coworker who, took credit for your idea 3 years ago.
Still running.
Still running. That is a massive app running in the background of your psyche, eating your battery, or your intense, envious obsession with buying a bigger house just to impress people you don't even actually like.
That app is constantly refreshing, draining your peace.
Yes. Emptying the boat is the conscious practice of pulling up that internal screen and just swiping those apps away, up and away.
And when you swipe them away, when you literally drop the cargo, the text makes a very specific promise.
Yeah.
The boat will go quickly.
It's an instant change.
There is a lightness, a sudden availability of processing power, this cognitive freedom that emerges when you finally stop carrying the crushing weight of the world's opinions and your own unchecked desires.
But emptying the boat isn't just a one-time event, is it?
Unfortunately, no.
You empty the boat, but you still have to put the boat back in the water. You still have to go to work on Monday, interact with difficult people, and just navigate the world.
And the text gives us two incredibly precise similes for the physics of how the awakened mind interacts with the world once the boat is empty.
Verses 401 and 407.
Right. It says, the true sage does not cling to pleasures or pains, interacting with them like water on a lotus leaf or like a mustard seed on the point of a needle.
The physics of those two natural phenomena are totally worth examining closely.
Let's look at the lotus leaf first.
Right. So a lotus leaf is naturally hydrophobic. It literally grows out of thick, murky mud. But if you drop dirty water onto the leaf, the water cannot permeate the surface.
It immediately beads up into a sphere and just rolls right off.
Exactly. The leaf remains completely dry and pristine, despite being completely surrounded by swamp water.
And then there's the mustard seed on the point of a needle.
Have you ever actually tried to balance a tiny, hard, round seed on the microscopic tip of a sewing needle?
I can't say I have, no.
It is physically impossible. There is zero surface area for the seed to grip. Gravity just pulls it off instantly.
And the text is arguing that this is exactly how the mind should react to anger, hatred, pride, and envy. The moment those dense, clumsy emotions touch the awakened mind, they slip off.
They just fall away.
Right. There's nowhere for them to take root because the mind has been sharpened to a point by restraint and made completely non-absorbent by the practice of non-attachment.
So let's translate this into a Tuesday afternoon, because it's easy to be a lotus leaf in a monastery.
Much harder in the office.
Much harder. How do you become the lotus leaf in your next incredibly stressful meeting? Imagine you are sitting in a conference room and a colleague actively tries to throw you under the bus.
We've all been there.
They criticize a project you poured your absolute soul into, and they do it right in front of leadership. The default human reaction is to be a sponge.
Yes, a sponge absorbs everything it touches. It pulls the dirty water deep into its core.
Right. You absorb the unfair criticism. It immediately turns into hot anger. Then it solidifies into a grudge. Then it ruins your entire evening. And you end up snapping at your kids at dinner because you are completely waterlogged with your colleagues' toxicity.
Your boat has taken on water and is literally sinking.
So how do we practice the physics of the lotus leash in that exact moment?
You have to practice feeling the criticism hit you, but consciously refusing to let it penetrate your core identity.
You recognize the words for what they are.
Exactly. They are sound waves in the air, usually born of the other person's own insecurity or political agenda. You let it beat up.
You still handle the professional situation, obviously. You answer the critique calmly. You defend the data, but internally, you remain entirely dry.
You don't let their anxiety become your anxiety.
Which, I'll admit, requires an immense amount of internal fortitude. Remaining a lotus leaf in a world that is constantly trying to spray you with mud is not a passive state.
Not at all. It requires active endurance. And the text acknowledges this reality beautifully.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the author doesn't try to sell a fake utopia.
They don't sugarcoat it.
No, they don't say, once you practice restraint, the world becomes super easy and everyone is incredibly nice to you. In fact, verse 414 describes the environment we have to navigate as this miry road, the impassable world and its vanity.
This miry road. Miry means sticky, swampy, bogged down.
It's a road that tries to suck your boots off with every single step you take.
The ancient writers are validating the immense friction of human existence here. The world is full of vanity, ego, conflict, and difficulty. It is often quite literally impassable.
And what do you need to walk a miry road without getting stuck? You need strength.
You do.
The text says the true sage is someone who, even though they have committed no offense, they endure reproach, bonds, and stripes. And the phrasing in verse 399 is just incredible. It says the sage has endurance for his force and strength for his army.
Endurance for his force and strength for his army. Think about the ancient world. Kings relied on literal armies of thousands of men with spears to protect them from the miry road.
But the sage doesn't need external guards.
Their army is their own internal capacity to endure.
You know, this sounds almost identical to Western Stoicism.
It is a profound comparative insight, actually. If you read the journals of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius,
Or Epictetus.
exactly, the slave-turned philosopher, you find the exact same psychological architecture. The Stoic foundational premise is a dichotomy of control.
You have absolutely no control over the miry road.
None. You cannot control the macroeconomy. You cannot control office politics. You cannot control whether you face illness or what the text calls reproach, bonds, and stripes.
Because bad things happen to good people. People will insult you even if you did absolutely nothing wrong. The road is muddy.
Exactly. But where you have absolute, unquestionable sovereignty is in your internal response to the mud. Your locus of control is entirely inside your own mind.
And the Dhammapada captures this perfectly in verse 380 when it says, "For self is the lord of self, self is the refuge of self."
Self is the refuge of self.
No one is coming to save you from your own mind. You have to build the sanctuary yourself, and the bricks are made of endurance.
But building that sanctuary requires radical independence.
And a complete refusal to look sideways at what everyone else is doing.
Right. Comparison is deadly here.
There is a verse, 365, that I think is the most devastatingly accurate diagnosis of the modern social media age. It says, "Let him not despise what he has received, nor ever envy others. A mendicant who envies others does not obtain peace of mind."
Envy is the absolute destroyer of the internal refuge. It is the fastest way to drill a massive hole in the bottom of your empty boat.
And we live in an era where envy has been systematically weaponized and monetized.
It's the business model of the internet.
It really is. Think about a platform like LinkedIn.
Oh boy.
It is an entire ecosystem dedicated to the professional humble brag.
I am so incredibly humbled and honored to announce my promotion to Senior Vice President of whatever.
And you log on just to see what your industry is doing.
And within 3 minutes, you feel like an absolute failure because everyone else appears to be launching startups, writing bestsellers, and vacationing in the Maldives.
And notice what that envy does mechanically to your mind. The text says you begin to despise what you have received.
It completely warps your perception of reality.
Yes, it does.
You look at your perfectly good job, your perfectly good house, your perfectly good life things you were genuinely grateful for just yesterday, and suddenly they look like garbage because they don't match the highly curated, filtered highlight reel of the person on the screen.
The psychological truth the author's pointing to is that peace and envy are mutually exclusive states. You cannot hold both in the mind simultaneously.
If you are constantly trying to mentally live in someone else's house, you can never be a refuge to yourself. You completely abandon your own post.
But this brings us to a really crucial tension, and I actually want to push back on the text here, because if we follow this path to its logical extreme, it starts to look very troubling to me.
Okay, how so?
Well, if we practice extreme restraint, if we completely empty the boat of all passion, if we become this hydrophobic lotus leaf that nothing sticks to, and we build this impenetrable internal fortress where we need absolutely nothing from the outside world.
Right, what's the result?
What does that person actually look like? Are they even human anymore?
It's a very fair question. And the text itself uses some very stark language to describe the end result of this path.
Yeah, verse 404 says, "The awakened person keeps aloof both from laymen and from mendicants who frequents no houses."
And verse 415 describes someone who, leaving all desires, travels about without a home.
And perhaps the most difficult phrasing for a modern ear is in verse 418, where it describes the sage as someone who has left both pleasure and pain, and who is cold.
Right, cold.
Cold is a terrible word in modern culture. What do we value today? We value deep community, vulnerability.
Passion-driven purpose.
Yes. Warmth, emotional connection, and being deeply invested in our families and our societies. If a friend told you their ultimate life goal was to become aloof, homeless, and cold,
You wouldn't think they were enlightened.
you try to get them into therapy.
You would.
We read these verses and think, does ultimate peace require total social isolation and apathy? To be free, do I really have to stop caring about my kids, my partner, or the injustices in the world?
This raises an important question, and it's the paradox of complete detachment. It really requires careful discernment from us as modern readers.
Okay, distinguish this for me.
We have to separate the ancient ascetic context from the enduring psychological truth. In ancient India, the literal wandering monk who had severed all family ties and owned nothing but a begging bowl that was a recognized, venerated social role.
But that doesn't work for a software engineer with 3 kids in the suburbs.
Exactly. Translating that into the 21st century for someone who has a mortgage, a career, and children requires understanding what the text is actually attacking.
It's attacking the bondage, right? Not the love.
Precisely. It is attacking the clinging, the anxiety. You can love your family with absolute devotion. You can be incredibly passionate about solving a social injustice, but you do it without the desperate, grasping anxiety that dictates, if I lose this or if I fail, my entire existence is destroyed.
So it's about acting out of abundance.
Yes, acting out of abundance, not out of a frantic need to control the outcome. You love without clinging. You participate without being consumed.
I see where you're going, and it makes me think about that word cold again. To us, cold means unfeeling, robotic, or cruel.
But what if we view it through the lens of a medical diagnosis?
Oh, tell me more.
In the context of Eastern philosophy, the unawakened mind is seen as burning with the fires of passion, greed, hatred, and delusion. If you are suffering from a raging 104-degree fever, being told you are finally cold is the best news in the world.
Wow, that is a vital reframe. The fever has broken.
Exactly. You are no longer burning up with anxiety. You are no longer burning with rage at the news cycle. You are no longer burning with the need to prove yourself to strangers on the internet. You are cool. You are refreshed.
And the text actually proves that this coldness isn't misanthropic apathy because it describes how this person actually interacts with others.
Right. Look at verses 368 and 406.
It says, "The true sage acts with kindness, is calm, and is tolerant with the intolerant, mild with fault finders, and free from passion among the passionate."
You cannot be mild with fault finders if you are just a grumpy hermit who hates humanity.
Exactly.
You are in the world, but not of its chaos. Which actually brings us to the culmination of the text.
So what does this all mean? We have talked about all this grueling internal work, restraining the gates of the senses, fasting from digital junk food, swiping away the background apps of hatred and clinging, enduring the miry road, and being the lotus leaf.
It's a lot of work.
It is. What is the ultimate payoff for all of this? What does the eye of the hurricane actually feel like?
Well, the destination the text points to is not a dark, empty void. It is a state of absolute clarity, joy, and elimination.
The descriptions of the awakened mind here are breathtaking. Verse 373 says that the practitioner whose mind is tranquil feels a more than human delight when he sees the law clearly.
A more than human delight.
And then it gives us this beautiful culminating image of the sage in verse 382. It says he brightens up this world like the moon when free from clouds.
Like the moon when free from clouds. Think about the mechanics of a cloudy night sky. The moon is always there. It is always full, always whole, always emitting light. But the world below is dark and confusing because that light is obscured by thick layers of clouds.
The clouds are our unbridled senses.
Exactly.
They are the background apps of passion and hatred. They are our envy, our ego, our constant need for external validation. The clouds obscure our natural luminous state.
When you practice restraint, you stop adding new clouds. When you empty the boat, you are actively blowing the existing clouds away. And what is revealed is your natural state. Brilliant, clear, illuminating light.
And notice the text says he brightens up this world. This intense internal work isn't just a selfish pursuit of personal peace.
Not at all.
When you attain this inner clarity, you become a source of light for everyone else who is still stumbling around in the dark on the miry road.
It's an act of service, ultimately.
It is. I want you, the listener, to really reflect on this for a second. Think about a moment in your own life. Maybe it lasted for just a fleeting few seconds when the clouds unexpectedly parted.
We've all had them.
A moment when you weren't agonizing over the future, you weren't nursing a grudge from the past, you weren't comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel. You were just completely, deeply present.
Maybe you were walking alone in the woods.
Or holding a sleeping child, or just taking a deep breath of cool air after a totally grueling day. In that brief moment, you felt that clear, bright moonlight of pure peace.
Every single human being has had flashes of that state. It is our baseline.
But what this ancient wisdom is arguing is that this doesn't have to be a happy accident that just happens once a year. It can be your permanent residence.
You can live in the moonlight.
You can, if you are willing to do the internal work to clear the clouds.
It is the work of a lifetime, but the blueprint has been handed to us.
It absolutely has. Which brings us to our final thought. I want to leave you with a challenge directly inspired by verse 379, which simply says, rouse thyself by thyself. Examine thyself by thyself.
A call to action.
Exactly. If you were to take a quiet moment tonight to truly examine yourself, not looking at your resume, not checking your bank balance, not caring about the clothes you wear or the external status you hold, but looking purely at the restraint and the peace of your inner world, what would you actually find?
Are you still wearing the performative goat skins while a ravening hunger tears you apart inside?
Or are you slowly, quietly, day by day, learning to empty the boat?
It's the only question that matters.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.